Hello and welcome in this next tutorial by 3D. In this tutorial we're going to show you how to add objects in Blender and how to navigate the 3D view. So if you have opened Blender, this area here is the 3D view. Now we don't gonna use these panels at the moment, so I'm just going to move them aside. So the 3D view, what can we see in this? We can see in the left bottom corner our axis, the Z, Y and X axis, and we can see the grid, and this grid is the middle or the center of our 3D space, and you can use it as a guide to see where in 3D space you are. And the green axis, the Y axis, the red, the X axis, and the Z axis goes up, but that isn't shown. So this point in the middle is 0, 0, 0, 0 for X, 0 for Y, and 0 for Z. Now let's add our first 3D object. Let's click on Add Mesh. Meshes are the first 3D objects we are going to discuss, and let's click on Plane, the most simplest of 3D objects, which consists just out of 4 points and one face or polygon. And you can see that the plane is created on the cursor. Now you can move that cursor point by clicking. Standard it is left clicking, but I set it at right clicking. You can change that at File, User Preferences, Input, and then select with left or right. Now if you're familiar with other 3D programs, like for instance 3D Max, and in 3D Max you select with left click, so you might want to change that to feel more at home in Blender. So if you move that around, you can create objects at other points. So if we click here and we add another plane, it will be created here. So let's add a third one. Now if you want to move the cursor, you can see that now it is a little below the plane, the grid. And if you want it more specific, you can use Shift S and you can go to cursor to center, which will point it right at the center of the grid, so you can place objects in the center of 3D space. Now let's start to navigate. The first thing we can do is use the scroll on your mouse to zoom in or out. Second thing we can do is hold down the scroll and move your mouse around, and you will see that the camera will rotate and you can rotate the view. And the third one is also with holding down scroll, but first pressing down shift, so shift scroll, and now if you move your mouse you drag the screen. So with these basic movements, scrolling, holding down the scroll and moving, and shift scroll and moving, you can find your way into 3D space. So for instance, if we want to have a closer look at this plane, we can zoom in and then drag the screen a bit so it is closer to us. Now we have 3 planes, and we can select each one by left clicking, or if you don't change the settings, right clicking, and you can select different planes. So suppose we want another plane right on top of this one, but our cursor is here. What we can do is again with Shift S and click on cursor to select it. Now the cursor will be on this plane, and if you click add, another one will create it right on top of it. I'll just drag it aside so you can see. What else can we see under Shift S? Cursor to grid, which moves the cursor to one of the grid points. So if we look from on top, or from left view, you see the grid here, and if I place the cursor here and I use Shift S cursor to grid, it will snap to the closest intersection of the grid. Another thing with Shift S is selection to cursor or selection to grid, which moves our selected object. So now we have here select this plane, and if we use selection to grid, it will move to the closest intersection of the grid. And if we place our cursor somewhere and we use Shift S, selection to cursor, the plane will move to the cursor point. So these are the basic movements: rotating by holding down scroll, scrolling for zooming in and out, and using Shift and holding down scroll to move. One more way to move is using Shift F, which create a square here. If you move our mouse, the camera will go to our mouse, so you can kind of point to the direction you want the camera to move. And if you click again, it will go back to normal. Now, what I find very easy to use is zoom selected. This is an option which will point the camera directly at the object you have selected. So if you select this plane and use zoom selected, we will go to this, select another. Okay. This will be very handy when using larger scenes, and if you want your view on something, and we will make a hotkey for that. So file, user preferences, and in input you can find all the things you can do in Blender, and you can make all hotkeys you want. So this is in the 3D view, and we can find it under 3D view global. If we go down a bit, we will find view selected, and if you change this to keyboard, you can press any key you want as hotkey there, and if you save, then the hotkey will be saved next time you start Blender. Now, what's important is if you save your preferences, it saves your entire scene. So if I use file new, file new, we will have those 4 planes, because those 4 planes existed while I saved my preferences. So the first thing we want to do is delete these planes by using delete or X and clicking delete, and then saving those user preferences again. Now, and